Milton Davis here. I'd like to talk to you today about one of our anthology series called Dark Universe. The Dark Universe series began probably about in 2000 and 2013. I had an idea of doing a anthology series about an Afrocentric galactic empire. It had been my observation that most of the time when we were writing about black people or African Americans and dealing with space, we were mainly dealing with black people as part of an ensemble or part of a crew or something like that. And I really never seen anybody playing with the ideal of a galactic empire being ruled or controlled by um, people of African descent. And that was the spark for the Dark Universe Anthology. I teamed up with Gene Peterson, and because I know Gene was a really big science fiction person, and I read a lot of his work and really loved it, and started tossing the ideal back and forth, and that's when we came up with the ideal of creating an anthology. But we wanted this anthology to be special. We wanted, instead of making it an open submission, we wanted to reach out to authors that we knew specialized in science fiction and fantasy, and people that we thought would be able to grasp the concept and really come up with some imaginative stories based in this world that we were going to create. And they did. We have two books so far in the series. This is the first one, the Dark Universe Anthology, the first one. And then we have the second one, which is the Dark Universe, the Bright Empire. The first book was basically a collection of stories that ran the entire range of the empire. The name of the empire is the Kassad Empire. It's based off the founders' names that were last name was Cassidy, and over the years evolved into Kassad. And the story takes place over 1,000 year period of time. When you think about the Kassad Empire, think about some of the great African empires that existed in pre-colonial Africa, like Mali and Songhai and Canaan, Bornu, of course the Egyptian dynasties. And what we were basically doing was thinking about something like that, but putting it in the scenario of space, a galactic empire. Now, the first book, the Dark Universe Anthology, basically spans the entire life of the empire. It starts with the first story is actually an origin story of the empire before it was an empire, and it goes into the eventual fall of the empire. While we were talking about this, one of the authors, Penelope Flynn, says, we've got this great history, we've got this great world that we've created, and we're basically talking about it from beginning to end. Why don't we do something that basically shows the empire in its heyday? And that's where the spark for Dark Universe, The Bright Empire came from. This is basically a collection of stories about the empire at its height. Each author is talking about the empire and different aspects of it. And again, just to give you an idea of some of the authors that contributed to this, in the Dark Universe, the first anthology, we have, of course, myself, Ronald T. Jones, Milan Edwards, K. Series Wright, Penelope Flynn, Gene Peterson, and Devon Sanders. These are the people that contributed to the first anthology. In the second anthology, The Bright Empire, we have William Hayashi, Tade Thompson, Balagoon Ojitade, Valjean Jeffers, Robert Jeffrey, Gerald Coleman, Hannibal Taboo, and Penelope Flynn again, and of course Gene Peterson and myself. So if you are familiar with Black speculative fiction, you know that we've got an amazing list of authors in both of these anthologies. As Gene just put in, we got authors from across the African diaspora, all of them contributing to this concept, and both books are great books. What I want to do today is concentrate on the Bright Empire, and I want to read you an excerpt from a story that I wrote for the anthology called Customs. This story kind of came from a couple of different directions. A lot of times when we talk about civilizations and we imagine these civilizations, very rarely do we deal with things like celebrations and holidays and different things that may be going on in these empires. Because when you're dealing with human societies, you always have these things. Either it be in like religious holidays, holidays based on seasons, on special events. There's always holidays and celebrations. The harvest, there's always things that people celebrate. And so I was thinking about the empire, and it was actually sparked by something that I read when I was doing research on the kingdom of Dahomey, where they had an annual celebration which was called customs. And during this customs time, it was basically a time where the emperor, the ruler of the Dahomey, the king of Dahomey society, would basically pay honor to the ancestors and show to the people that he or she was still worthy of being leader for the empire. And that's kind of where this story customs came from. It does not deal directly with the leader of the Kassad Empire, the Oliphant, but it deals with a person who is part of what we call the 1 million. And the 1 million are the descendants of people, or the first people who left Earth to establish this empire. Like again, before it was an empire, and their descendants are considered to be a sacred group, the highest of the hierarchy with this empire. And the particular character in this story, Pandare, is having some issues about his status, and it's all related to the celebration of customs. So I'm going to read you an excerpt from this story. Again, this is Customs from Dark Universe, The Bright Empire. Marabout Pandari Grimes watched with agitation as the cargo lifts loaded the ships on the launch platform. If his calculations were correct, the ships would hold the entire 300-ton allotment required by the Oliphant for the upcoming customs. 300 tons of minerals, foods, and finished goods that could serve the local population much better than the pampered nobles of Ziara. These were his thoughts, and they would remain so. Robert Claiborne, Customs Expedition Coordinator, approached him, the manifest hollow hovering over his open right hand. Marabout, is there a problem? He asked. Pandari cursed silently for allowing his emotions to show on his graceful umber face. No, Robert, everything's fine. Robert shared the hollow. You can look at the manifest yourself. All the items requested have been accounted for. Pandari waved him off. Inform me when the loading is complete. We're scheduled to depart in 3 days. And make sure our gate clearances are in order. I don't want any delays. Yes, Marabout. I'll make sure of it. Pandari returned to his pod. Aksum, he said. The long way. The pod lifted into high traffic, then sped south. Pandari rubbed his forehead as he reached for the bottle of bourbon perched on his console. Mama said he drank too much, but Mama was one to talk with her daga addiction. Everyone on Erisha suffered from some habit, but it was understandable. The planet was only partially terraformed, which presented unique problems as far as climate and gravity were concerned. But the main burden rested in the bays of the cargo lifts, the one obligation every planet in the Empire was required to fulfill: customs. Pandari relaxed as the brown liquor burned its way down his throat. He was fourth-generation Marabout and true 1 million lineage. He envied the generations before him. Peoples who bond to the Empire and the Kassads were unwavering. His only involvement with the homeland had been during customs, and what he experienced left much to be desired. How could such people celebrate in such a way, while planets like Erisha struggled to provide the means of their enjoyment? A bucking waste, he said out loud, in the only place he could do so and not be accused of blasphemy. He was raised to believe customs were an integral part of the prosperity of the Bright Empire, a homage to the ancestors that built it and saved the known from the Dark Age. But he had his own opinions. The pod meandered over Erisha as he finished his bourbon. He was full-on drunk and didn't relish returning to the office in such a state, so he decided to kill more time. Barons, he said. The barons are restricted, the pod replied. Override restriction, he ordered. Command sequence. Askia, Nkosi, 7-6 Maroon. A hollow board appeared before him, and he punched in the remaining code. It was an archaic way to communicate with the pod's core, which made it difficult to hack. The pod flashed green, then veered south toward Erisha's equator. View, Pandari said. The pod became transparent. From below, Pandari seemed to fly, streaking over the verdant landscape. As he soared closer to the equator, the foliage succumbed to the increasing temperature. The pod's air system kicked in to compensate for the rising heat. Kilometers from the equator, the flora and fauna surrendered to the adverse conditions, a dead landscape of rock and heat passing below him. During his term as mayor, about 10% of the terraforming equipment had failed. The failure was mainly off-planet solar deflectors. It was imperial equipment far beyond the skills of his engineers, yet the Empire had ignored his request for assistance. There were others that could do the work, but their demands were too high, and the results would be questionable. With less arable land, it was becoming more difficult to sustain the population, let alone collect the proper libations for customs. Pandari returned to his seat and poured another drink. Base, he said. The pod veered north. By the time it landed in the compound, he was completely and utterly drunk. As the craft eased into the flashing landing lights, the doors of the upper level opened, and his mother emerged, walking briskly toward the pod. Pandari sighed as he took one last swig from his bottle. This morning was not going to improve. After finishing the bourbon, he opened his storage door, then took out a small box containing his sobering pills. He tossed 2 into his mouth, forcing them down his throat. He would still be inebriated once he stepped out of the pod, but he could fake it until the pills kicked in. Maybe. He smoothed out his robes, played with his afro, then took a deep breath. Open, he said. The pod door swished open. Nana stood before the door, her thick arms folded under her heavy breast. Pandari gripped the railing tight as he climbed down, struggling for balance. He was drunker than he thought. Hi, Nana. You're drunk. For the time being, Pandari replied. How can you do such a thing at a time like this? Pandari let go of the rail, then steadied himself. How can I not? Our family reputation hinges on customs and you treat it like it's some game, she said. We should have never given you this responsibility. You didn't give me anything, Pandari replied, and I certainly didn't ask. And don't worry, the libations are in order. The ships are being loaded as we speak. The family's honor will not be tarnished. Nana's frown eased. What about your Laloba? What about it? He replied. Pandari pushed by Nana as she sighed. We are going to Ziara, she said. It would be a good time for you to consider marriage. I'm already married. To Aricia. Nana ignored his comment. All the great families will be in attendance. There's also a rumor that there are a few eligible women among the royal bloodline. That sounds wonderful, Pandari said. I hope they find happiness. Stop this foolishness, Nana snapped. It's time you accepted your responsibility to this family. Pandari's anger overruled his intoxication. He spun to face Nana, speaking through gritted teeth. Foolishness? Is it foolish that I spend every day trying to keep most of the people on this planet alive? And I mean most, because we don't have the resources to keep them all alive. Every day I'm forced to make life and death decisions about our precious empire, because our precious empire can't spare the technicians. Then I have to steal food from their mouths and bless the ancestors who apparently don't give a shit about us. Nana's stunned expression slowly morphed into calmness. This assignment is only temporary, she replied. There will be better planets on which to serve. Such an opportunity can only transpire if we deliver the proper libations to customs. That is why this is so important. You talk as if we arrived here last week, Pandari said. 4 generations, Nana. 4 generations of our family have served here. We are just as much Aricians as the original inhabitants. Nana looked at Pandari as if he had cursed her in the vilest way. We are 1 million, she said. When we arrive on Ziara for customs, we will be with our people. Aricia is an assignment. We are Ziarans. Never forget that. Ever. Nana spun about and stomped away. Pandari glowered, then followed. In his house, another bottle of bourbon waited for him. He would drink himself to sleep, and in the morning, he would complete the preparation to return to Ziara. Pandari sat in his office, studying the hollow screens floating before him. Sheila Bandana hovered over his shoulder, peering through her archaic-style glasses at the numbers flowing before them. "So what's the situation in Kier?" he asked. "A bad harvest," Sheila replied. "They're too close to the break and the instability affecting the weather patterns. They have 3 seasons at the most before they'll have to relocate." "Any arable land to the north?" "Some, but not enough. We'll have to resettle about 20%. "Thick." Pandari pushed back into his chair as he rubbed his forehead. "Excuse me, Marabout, but don't you have a ship to catch?" "They can't leave without me," Pandari replied. "We've gone over these numbers before," Sheila said. "You know them by heart." "Just making sure I haven't forgotten anything," he said. "When we reach Ziara, I plan on petitioning for a meeting with Imperial Tech. If they won't respond to my messages, maybe they'll answer in my presence." "Isn't it forbidden to conduct business during customs?" she asked. "Yes," Pandari replied. Sheila touched his shoulder. "Be careful, Pandari. We need you here." Pandari patted Sheila's hand and stood. "Sometimes you have to take a risk to get what you need." "I'll be okay. Make sure the lights are still on when we return." Sheila grinned. "I will. Good luck and enjoy yourself." "I won't," he replied. Pandari summoned a lift on his way to the curbside. He hated leaving when there was so much to be done. His only consolation was that he might be able to get something done on Ziara besides socializing with family members that he felt no closer to than a frozen asteroid in the unknown. A lift waited for him as he exited the building. Door opened. He climbed in and it rose from the pavement, then sped to the central airlift where the libation fleet waited. Pandari used the few moments of peace left to him for meditation. The rest of his time would be spent faking enthusiasm among others and listening to Nana's constant rattling about proper protocol once he arrived at the family compound. It had been 10 years since he last visited Ziara. He was 18, a man by Ziaran standards, but still young enough to be required to show deference to his elders. At 28, he was still younger than most, but his position as Marabout would gain him more respect, unless he said or did something that smeared his reputation. That was what Nana feared most. He arrived at the airfield 10 minutes later. Despite his mood, he had to admit that the fleet looked impressive. He pressed the hollow button on the command screen and sent out a message. "This is Marabout Grimes. Is the custom team assembled?" Iondella Simpson image appeared. "Awaiting your arrival, Marabout," she replied. "You're late." "Aren't I always?" Iondella moved aside and Nana took her place. "Not a good start, my son." Pandari waved the screen away. The lift touched down on the platform moments later and Pandari jumped out onto the metal surface. He fast walked through the sliding door where the team waited. All the ship navigators, captains, and storage personnel were waiting. Iondella and Nana stood side by side. "Ready for inspection?" "Yes, Marabout." "Lead the way." The team loaded onto the cargo elevator, then descended to the tarmac. Iondella summoned a truck, and they were on their way. They inspected each ship from top to bottom, doing a physical inventory to make sure everything was in order. They then visited the passenger ships, greeted the dancers, acrobats, musicians, and support teams. All were excited and enthusiastic. For many of them, this was a life-changing event. Very few people beyond the 1 million were privileged to visit the mother planet. Few were still participating in customs. Their mood was infectious. Pandari smiled, laughed, and chatted with them, while Nana acknowledged them with her famous perfunctory wave and grin. By the end of the day, all the ships had been inspected and deemed worthy for launch. Pandari met Nana that night for dinner. Baba and his siblings had left for Ziara 2 weeks ago to prepare for their arrival, so the two of them were alone. He entered in formal dinner attire, the one requirement he followed. Nana was very strict on protocol. Her life hovered around the customs that separated the 1 million from the other citizens of the Empire. She always told him that as the Empire expanded, it was essential that they kept their traditions. Otherwise, they would be swallowed in a sea of mediocrity. Pandari ignored his mother's frown as he set the bottle of bourbon on the table. "Don't you ever stop drinking?" "When I'm asleep or unconscious. This is not a joke. It's a habit that will kill you one day." "Not if we lived on Ziara." "But we don't. which is why you should take care. The servers brought out dinner, placing their plates before them. Nana looked at the plate and frowned. Pandari chuckled, then began eating. I'll be so glad when we reach Ziara, she said. The food there is excellent. You only complain about our food during customs. I'm surprised you haven't starved to death. It is the sacrifices we make that define our character. Pandari poured his bourbon into his shot glass and took a sip. We shouldn't have to make sacrifices. We are 1,000,000. We serve the Empire with what little resources they provide and get nothing in return for it. You exaggerate, Nana replied. Pandari glared at Nana. Do you review my reports? I glance at them, she said. It's not my place to second guess you. Pandari rolled his eyes. People are starving on this planet every day. They are starving unnecessarily because our gracious Oliphant can't spare a few techs to repair our deflector grids. The Empire is vast, Nana replied. Imperial resources are spread thin. I'm sure the Oliphant has reviewed your request, and assistance is on the way. I've been requesting that assistance ever since I've been Marabout. Imperial support is apparently non-existent. Nana looked up from her plate. I will not have you slander the Empire in my presence. Keep your insults to yourself. You walk a thin line, my son. Pandari hacked at his food. And what will you do, Nana? Turn me in? Of course not, she replied. But I fear you will say the wrong thing before the wrong person, and it will bring your ruin. Don't worry, Nana, Pandari said. My blasphemy is discreet. Whenever I feel like shouting my displeasure to the world, I drink this. He gripped his bourbon bottle and raised it high. Drinking loosens tongues as often as it quiets them, which is why I drink until I pass out. Pandari poured another shot, then tossed it down his throat. Enjoy your dinner, Nana. He grabbed his bottle, then stood to leave. Where are you going? Back to my room. You haven't finished your meal. I've suddenly lost my appetite. He trudged back to his room and finished the bottle. He stared at his paintings, wondering exactly why his relationship with Nana and his family soured. There was no specific issue, no defining moment that sent them drifting apart. It was a gradual condition that grew as he aged, as he became more involved in the administration of Eretia. Baba stressed immersing oneself in the culture in order to best serve its needs, and he did that. But Baba never told him that an emotional distance had to be maintained in order to serve the people, yet keep the needs and goals of the Empire first. That's where he failed. Pandari's stomach grumbled, and he ordered a light snack from the kitchen. He spent the remainder of the evening in his room, nibbling on Eretia bread while listening to music. This would be a longer journey than he realized. The Eretian libation fleet reached the first gate 2 days before their launch. For nearly 5 days they showed up from gate to gate, whisking through checkpoints because of their custom credentials. Traffic increased as they neared Ziaran space, the number of libation fleets growing at each gate. Pandari became more irritable the closer they came. The anticipation of the celebration and potential meeting with Imperial Tech grated on his nerves. His liquor supplies were being exhausted, so he kept away from Nana as much as he could. Avoiding her completely was impossible. There was only so much room in the ship, and their duties forced them to meet each other. But it was all he could stand as her mood became more joyous, the closer they came to Ziara. The final gate jump was bedlam. Fleets crowded the airspace, monitor ships zipping among them to keep the order. Security drones drifted among the throng, scanning ships for contraband and weapons, a reminder that the peace the Empire touted was a reality only to the uninformed. While Nana paced about, anxious for landfall and the fellowship of family, Pandari enjoyed the final moments of peace. He sat on the bridge of the ship, sipping bourbon while watching the display before the gate. They finally reached the gate. The procedure went smoothly and without delay. Apparently, Baba contacted the right people and paid the necessary respect to ensure their quick entry. The ship jolted, and he experienced the brief disorientation of jump space. When his vision cleared, Ziara loomed before him in all its splendor. Despite how he felt about the people, he had to admit it was a beautiful planet. With the right equipment, Aricia could be just as appealing. The thought darkened his mood, and he took another long swig of the bourbon, ignoring his snifter. The bridge view wavered, and the image of the planet was replaced by the beautiful face and welcoming smile of an imperial greeter. Praise be to the ancestors. Welcome to customs, the woman said. On behalf of the elephant Osei Kassad, we welcome you to our sacred celebration. Please relinquish control over your ship and allow our landing system to guide you to your proper pad. Pandari signaled the captain, and he followed the greeter's request. The ships fell into a single line landing pattern, cruising to the pad selected for their lineage. Pandari's ship was the first cleared to land, the other ships holding an elliptical pattern, while his ship descended to the urban sprawl of Ziara's capital city. Nana joined him on the bridge, a warm smile on her face. We are home, son. We are home. As they neared the pad, the lineage shuttles came into view, the family kente displayed on each vehicle. The ship touched down soundly on the pad. Pandari took a deep breath, wishing he'd taken more drinks earlier. Nana's touch on his shoulder made him flinch. Come, she said. Our family awaits. He followed Nana to the lift. 3 levels later, they emerged from the ship. Pandari coughed, his body adjusting to Ziara's heavy atmosphere. The shuttles cruised forward, then stopped a few meters before them. Baba and his siblings emerged smiling and dressed impeccably for the occasion. Baba gave Nana a long hug before grasping Pandari's hand and pulling him into a hug. Welcome home, son, he said. It's good to see you, Baba. Afiato punched his shoulder. He winced and glared at his younger sister. Took you long enough to get here, Pani, she said. You know how those jams at the gate can be, Pandari replied. Liar, she said. His brother Ogundipe stood in the background, observing the reunion. Pandari looked at him, then waved him over. What are you waiting for, Dipe? Permission? Dipe sauntered up to him and they hugged. I know you don't want to be here, he whispered to Pandari. Doesn't make a difference, does it? Pandari whispered back. Family first. Come, Baba said. Everyone is waiting at the compound. They were walking to the shuttle when the sound of drumming and chanting broke the working din of the pad. Pandari turned to see the Orishan performers dancing from their transport. He looked at Dipe and Yato, and the 3 shared a conspiratorial smile. Baba, Nana, you go ahead, Pandari said. We'll be along. Nana frowned while Baba attempted to hide a grin. We have no time for premature revelry, Nana said. There are important family elders waiting to meet with you, Pandari. And they will, Pandari replied. I'll just be a bit long. Besides, aren't we here to celebrate? We'll only keep him for a minute, Afiato said. Nana's frown bloomed into a wide smile. She could never refuse Afiato. I guess it's okay. But don't stay all day, understand? We won't, Dipe and Yato said. They grabbed Pandari's arms and the 3 hurried to the performers. Thank you, Pandari said to them. You owe us, Dipe replied. And be sure we will collect. Of course you will, ragamuffins, he replied, using his nickname for them. The Orisha performance volume increased when they spotted the trio coming toward them. The dancers enveloped them, and they danced as well as they could. Pandari felt something press against his back and turned to see Kefi, master drummer of Orisha, and his drumming instructor, with his djembe. Shall we, Marabout? Pandari snatched the djembe from Kefi, then tossed the shoulder strap over his head. Kefi swung his djembe from behind his back, and the 2 immediately fell into a playful rhythm, matching the cadence of the music. The dancers and singers gathered around them, their exuberance infecting the entire pad. Soon troops from other planets danced their way, joining the impromptu festivity. Dare! Dipe shouted. Pandari turned toward Dipe's voice and saw his brother with a bottle of palm wine in his hand and a mischievous grin on his face. Pandari drummed with one hand while taking the bottle from Dipe, then drinking. Now it's a party, he said. He glanced at Yato, who was in the middle of a friendly dance competition with the others. She was a master dancer, but because of their status would not be allowed to perform. She would, however, participate in the lineage celebration within the compound, which was a more dignified affair. A booming voice cut into the good times. Celebrants, while we respect your enthusiasm, we must ask you to clear the paths to make room for other arrivals. Please proceed to your shuttles for departure. The people of Ziara welcome your energy. Pandari and Kefe danced and drummed in sync, leading the others to the open-air shuttles. They remained on the pad as the troop filed into the shuttles, continuing to dance and sing. Once everyone was on board, they climbed in, making their way to the front of the vehicle. As the shuttles lifted off the pad, they continued to play, leading the carousal into the heart of Ziara. The shuttles cruised in second-level traffic, passing between skyscrapers decorated as flamboyant as the revelers. Their music clashed with that of the street musicians and singers, with each group briefly coming into sync as they encountered each other, then reverting to their own rhythms as the groups separated. The songs they played were traditional homages that everyone in the empire knew by heart, sung to them as children and then taught in schools throughout their lives. They were as important a part of the empire as the Oliphant. Pandari felt the swell of pride as he played despite himself. A brief glance into the faces of his Eritrean entourage stole that feeling. His mission was to save his people. He had to stay focused. He continued drumming, but now the smile on his face was a facade. And that's an excerpt from my story, Customs, from the Dark Universe, The Bright Empire. Both these books are available now for purchase. You can purchase them from MV Media as well as anywhere books are sold. It's available as in paperback, in ebook for Kindle, Nook, wherever you want to get it. But again, thank you guys for spending a few minutes with me. I hope you get a chance to take a look at both of these books and enjoy some amazing stories and hopefully to finish Customs. Y'all have a great day, and we'll talk to you soon. Peace.